is that the wrong term?
Yeah, so what we were seeing, of course, is that inflation, while it's been coming down, it's not coming down quite as fast as a little while ago. So the come down is slowing down. And as a result, there was some anticipation that maybe the Fed would react to that and would then cut down on some of that optimistic forecast for the future in terms of rate cuts. And they're not doing that. So they're not overreacting to the slower than expected inflation reduction numbers that we're seeing. And they're saying, hey, let's wait and see. Let's not overreact to kind of months to months. Let's still plan to stick with that course of action with the rate reductions unless we see much worse inflation numbers coming in the coming months.
And what were the kind of hurdles and challenges that Jerome Powell and his board saw ahead for those decisions? I guess the sort of wild cards out there that may make them change course again.
Yeah, so of course we are seeing a persistent inflation level. It's still above 3%, and of course the target is 2%. But that said, it's been coming down, and the anticipation is that some of the hiccups that we're seeing now are basically just due to the much faster rate of inflation reduction that we're seeing a year ago. So we're taking kind of 12-month average, is maybe not looking quite as good right now. But the anticipation is that in the next couple of months, we're going to continue to see a reduction in inflation and then allow those rate cuts. But of course, the economy is still quite strong. We're seeing a lot of job gains. We're seeing persistent consumer spending. So even though the inflation is coming down, it's still not a very cool economy.
Yeah, and I guess in an election you're going to be plenty of pressure around when those cuts come to. Anastasia, thanks so much for your time. It's Anastasia Fedek, Assistant Professor of Finance at the Haas Business School at the University of California, Berkeley. Tineke, what then did we learn from last night about what we might hear from Andrew Bailey and his team at the Bank of England a little later on today when it comes to our interest rates?
To some extent, it's a little bit more of the same, even though the UK inflation numbers that we saw yesterday actually were a bit better than expected. So that is moving in the right direction. But similar to the US, our labour market is still quite tight, so wage inflation still needs to be watched. And clearly, the economic growth in the UK is at a much lower level. I mean, the Fed sort of upgraded their forecast for GDP growth. I don't think we're going to get that. So, what I think also will be different is the voting. So the Fed voted unanimously to keep the rates unchanged. It'll be interesting if we see the same from the Bank of England.
Yeah, the other thing that's often different when we look at these two decisions together is that we get a lot more information, don't we, from the Federal Reserve. We actually hear a lot more of their commentary about what happens, what they think might happen going forward, what their outlook kind of is. Do you think, given you talked about as well, that the Bank of England may give us a little bit more detail than they normally do a little later on today?
I think that would be helpful. It's always a little bit, the more you give, the more people want. So but overall, there are more insights that we're getting gradually about what the Bank of England thinks will happen, and that is what they base their decisions on. So hopefully they'll continue with these Bank of England projections.
We'll pick through a couple more stock market stories with Tineke in a moment, but let's move away from the big economics now and talk about investment, because the government-backed British Business Bank has announced the second round of what it terms its Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund today. Sarah Ellaby is the chief executive of Nova Pangaea Technologies, a Redcar-based clean tech company, and was one of those who used the scheme in its first round, which came back in 2017. Sarah, morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Just explain, first of all, then, this investment fund. What is it? How does it work?
Well, from Nova Pangaea's perspective, we've taken in several rounds from Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund from an equity perspective. So they've continued to follow on in the business, and it's allowed us to move from a demonstration facility and progress our technology all the way through to a pathway to commercialisation. So like I said, they've continued to follow on with Nova Pangaea and continue to support our growth plans.
Right, so this is an investment, it's not a loan or a grant, it's a full-on investment in the company itself.
It is, it's an equity investment. They are shareholders of our business alongside of course, the likes of the parent company of British Airways, which is IAG.
Yeah, and so I guess the obvious question is, why did you look for financing there? Could you not find it from other commercial sources?
No, I mean, Northern Power is the forefront and centre from an SME perspective, and specifically, investing in businesses in the north. We have a technology, of course, on forefront and centre of decarbonisation of aviation, specifically transportation. So we have, it's an attractive technology. Northern Powerhouse is one of our continued, really loyal shareholders in the business, and we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund.
And practically, what has it allowed you to do? Can you give us some examples?
So we operate a demonstration facility up on Teesside. We're moving that into commercialisation. In order to move that into commercialisation, we need to obviously build out and invest in our people. We need to bring the right skills. We are at the heartbeat of the country from an industrial perspective. So we have, we're in the right area of the northeast, and of course this is really exciting with the second fund, because it's going to cover the entire northeast. So businesses more like Nova Pangaea Technology can access finance. And of course, this second fund is much larger. It's 660 million, which will not only unlock more investment and funding opportunities, but it will also create a tremendous amount of jobs for northern economy.
Well, that's certainly the hope, isn't it? Sarah, thanks so much for your time. Sarah Ellaby, Chief Executive of Nova Pangaea Technologies there. Let's return to Tineke Freeka, and as I say, pick through a couple of stock market stories. And Tineke, what could be the kind of biggest IPO flotation on the stock market this year? Reddit, never quite sure exactly how to describe it. Social media site doesn't quite do it justice. Sort of a sort of discussion board site almost, isn't it? But could be worth a pretty pumpy valuation on the New York Stock Exchange.
Yeah, no, that's right. So, they've been this IPO has been in the works for more than 3 years, and yes, so we've heard that it will be priced at the top end of the range at $34 per share. This means it's sort of around $6 billion in size, which sounds a lot, but recently they raised some private money, and at that point the company was valued at $10 billion. So it has gone down from that. Saying that it's been sort of oversubscribed means that more people want to participate in the IPO than there are shares, so that's always a good sign. And yesterday we had an IPO of an IA kind of related stock that IPO'd on NASDAQ, was up more than 70%. The timing might be quite nice, just when we've heard from the Fed, and so I suspect it will go well, but this is, as you say, it's mainly linked to advertising and it's making a loss. So how much is this worth? I wouldn't know.
Well, I suppose once again it's one of those companies, isn't it? Is this about the data that it has, just given the volume of users?
I mean, typically this is about users and can they monetize it, and typically it's been through advertising. They're also talking that maybe they want to do some licensing of users, but users can move, right? So it's how AI will impact their model, don't know. So that it's an interesting story.
Shares going in the other direction was Kerry, the owner of Gucci, big faller yesterday. What's going on? Why does there seem to be so much pressure on a couple of these big luxury firms?
Yeah, no, so they issued a first quarter sort of trading saying that their sales will be much lower, and it was all driven by Gucci. So Gucci is one of their biggest brand, Kering owns a number of luxury brands. A lot of sort of, and this was about, China sales falling, and a lot of China-linked stocks fell. However, it does feel like it's quite Kering specific. So Gucci is about 2/3 of their income, so they're very, very dependent on it. And they've changed designer. So what you then don't know, are the previous Gucci customers, do they like what this new designer puts out? And I'm not an expert, but it sounds like it's a little bit more timeless, and maybe that suggests maybe before was a bit more edgy. We have heard from...
Well, an interesting trend to keep following, isn't it? Tineke, thanks so much for your time. Tineke Freeka, the Senior Fund Manager at Waverton.
Thanks, Will. It is 28 minutes past 6. Here's Carty with the sports news.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Wales men have a Euro 2024 playoff semi-final tonight against Finland. Win that and Wales will be one win away from reaching their third successive European Championship. Not that the Wales manager Rob Page is looking past that Finland game yet.
We know they're going to be a big physical team and they will pose a threat. The front three are very good. They work really well together. So they will be a threat, and they're here for a reason because they're a good team. So we're going to have to be at it. I've said earlier, irrespective of who we're playing against, if we bring our A game, how we know we can play, then I'm confident the result will take care of itself.
There's commentary of Wales versus Finland on 5 Live, Radio Wales and BBC Sounds. Tennis, and Andy Murray and Jack Draper have both won their first round matches at the Miami Open. Draper beat Japan's Taro Daniel in straight sets, while Murray had a tough 3-set victory against the former Wimbledon finalist Matteo Berrettini, who struggled with dizziness in the second set.
Yeah, it was obviously a great win for me. I started off a little bit slow, but then I do think I played pretty well from the middle of the first set through to the end of the match. Created a lot of opportunities, and he was struggling for a little bit at the end of the second, beginning of the third, and I capitalised on that, got to a quick start in the third, and served it out well at the end.
The former England Rugby Union captain Owen Farrell says he remains happy with his decision to step away from England after making himself unavailable for this year's Six Nations in order to prioritise his and his family's mental well-being. Farrell will join French side Racing 92 next season, which rules out a possible return to the England side, a move that has drawn criticism from some fans.
I don't really try and look too much into it, and obviously it's hard to get away from nowadays, but it'd be wrong of me to entertain it too much, I guess, because I guess anybody's opinion I respect, or anybody's opinion who I think of, or anybody I know, to be honest, I wouldn't see them going into comment sections and writing stuff, so why should I think about it too much?
And Susie Wolff has taken legal action against motorsport's governing body, the FIA, following its controversial conflict of interest inquiry into her last year. Wolff is the director of the F1 Academy Series for aspiring female drivers and the wife of the Mercedes team Toto Wolff. She said she had filed a criminal complaint in the French courts in relation to the statements made about her by the FIA last December. Racing tips the finish. We've got 4 winners in a row this week so far. Chepstow 2:45, number 11 Lovetree, Southall 4:55, number 1 Torch Soul.
There's the other thing.
No one knows what it's like to be a prince when you have done nothing wrong.
This is the untold story of Annette Hewins.
Arrested over the murder of a mother and her 2 young children.
I need to know why I was charged for a crime that I hadn't done.
A shocking miscarriage of justice.
There is no credible case against Annette Hewins. It is a disgrace.
Finding the truth really matters to me because Annette was my mum.
Annette, how do you feel to come out today? I want to be with my kids and my husband.
Wrongly accused. Listen on BBC Sounds.
It's coming up to 28 minutes to 7. You're listening to Today on BBC Radio 4 with Will Raja and Johnny Dyer. Let's get a summary of the news from Caroline Nichols.
A long-awaited report on changes to women's state pension age is due out later this morning, with campaigners hoping it will lead to significant compensation. They say millions of women born in the 1950s were pushed into poverty by the government's decision to raise their state pension age in line with men's. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman has spent 5 years looking into the issue and how the Department for Work and Pensions notified women of the changes. A leading child protection expert had said tens of thousands of youngsters are at risk of being groomed and coerced into crime by organised gangs. The warning comes from Professor Alexis Jay, who helped to reveal the extent of child sexual exploitation in Rotherham. Rishi Sunak's flagship Rwanda bill will not return to the Commons until after the Easter holidays, after the House of Lords inflicted another series of defeats on the government's draft law. The legislation is intended to stop court challenges to efforts to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda by declaring the East African country to be safe. Analysis by the BBC has found that most of the last places on the scheme to rebuild schools in England went to those with dangerous wrack concrete. Head teachers at other schools with problems including leaking roofs and temporary classrooms say they now fear they're stuck with no chance of improvements. The Department for Education said it had invested more than £15 billion to improve school buildings since 2015. The diagnosis rate for early-stage breast cancer has been boosted by 12% thanks to an AI tool tested by the NHS Grampian Hospital Trust. It was able to see tiny signs of cancer in 11 women missed by human clinicians. The consumer group Which says some popular Easter eggs cost 50% more than they did a year ago, while others have shrunk in size. Scientists say climate change could be to blame, with a humid heat wave in West Africa affecting cocoa yields.
Caroline, thank you. It is 27 minutes to 7, and let's turn to politics now with Henry Zeffman, our chief political correspondent. Morning, Henry. Let's start with the Rwanda bill, shall we? Where's it got to?
Good morning. Well, I've slightly lost track of whether it's ping or it's pong, but either way, it's coming back to the House of Commons from the House of Lords, but not until after the Easter break. So the House of Lords yesterday insisted on reinserting 7 amendments that had been taken out of it on Monday by the House of Commons. I think the general expectation remains that this bill, in almost entirely unamended or maybe even completely unamended form, will end up passing after Easter. But the timetable now means that most people think if a flight is going to take off for Rwanda, that probably isn't going to happen until round about June at the earliest, and that delays the arguably more important questions, which are, is it the deterrent that the government hopes it will be, and also is it the political boon to the government that so many Conservative MPs hope it could be.
What about this lead story today, Henry, about the Ombudsman's report into women's pensions, the so-called WASPI women? This is all about the idea that as the state pension age was raised, there were millions of women who lost out, and they feel unfairly, and it was done for economic reasons, partly to save money, but potentially political cost to those who did raise that state pension age.
Long-running story, also a long-running investigation, a 5-year investigation by the Parliament, which is going to be looked into today. We don't know what this report by the Voluntary Health Service Ombudsman is going to recommend, but there's some suggestions it might recommend the establishment of a compensation scheme. Ultimately, it will then be a decision of the government how to proceed.
That's right, the programme. Henry Zeffman, thank you.
It's 24 minutes to 7 for the 6th time in as many months. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is making a swing through the Middle East. He kicked off yesterday in Saudi Arabia. He's heading to Cairo today. His long schedule, Scotland, Israel later. His focus, of course, the fighting between Israel and Hamas. Israeli and international hostages held in Gaza, and grander plans for a possible Middle East peace. The US is circulating a draft UN Security Council resolution linking a call for a ceasefire to release hostages held in Gaza. Washington Tom Baker is travelling with the Secretary of State and caught up with him on the tarmac in the Saudi city Jeddah with the engines ready.
Well, it's very noisy, I know, Johnny, because we're currently on the US military plane that's about to depart from Jeddah, heading to Cairo. Mr. Blinken is on the plane at the moment, talking to some of his aides. We head for a short flight where he'll meet with 6 ministers from Arab countries and the Palestinian Authority. Overnight, he finished this meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. We've just had a bit of information about what was discussed there. 2 things really the key points, talking about, they say, an enduring end to the crisis in Gaza, and also discussions about what they describe as greater regional integration between countries in the region. Now that is a reference to this long sought after idea of normalisation between Saudi Arabia and Israel. This was in the works before the October the 7th attacks. The Americans are now pushing it again as part of what they would see as a much longer term way out of the crisis in Gaza, where you basically get the Saudis to sponsor the process of rebuilding, getting governance and security into Gaza, with the Palestinian Authority there in charge on the ground. What the Saudis then get in return is a
wider deal, which means they recognise Israel. That's what Israel gets from this. The Saudis then get US weapons and a civilian nuclear power program from the Americans. So a huge deal being considered. It seems really quite unbelievable if you think about the scale of catastrophe on the ground, and also the fact, of course, that there is still no breakthrough in the ceasefire discussions happening separately in Doha.
Tom, this is the Secretary of State's sixth swing through the region in as many months. Do you get the sense that there's any worth to these projects?
All of these trips are about getting the wider region engaged in some kind of constructive or positive process, and that in itself, I think, would be the view of the Americans, prevents, they would hope, a further collapse into a greater regional crisis. So it's getting, the key figures around the table, even if in the end this part of the discussions go nowhere.
Tom, safe flying. Thanks very much indeed.
Safe flying indeed. 21 minutes to 7. An expert witness was asked by a post office prosecutor to consider changing his testimony to avoid a damaging concession, the BBC has found. Fujitsu engineer Gareth Jenkins rephrased parts of the report on the Horizon IT system after comments from barrister Warren Tatford. The evidence was used in the 2010 case against postmistress Seema Misra, who was wrongly jailed while pregnant. Our business correspondent Mark Ashdown joins us to explain more. Mark, first of all, what have you found?
Hi, morning. Well, expert witnesses, firstly, they're used, we know, in all sorts of legal proceedings, aren't they? They have an expertise in a particular field, and crucially, they are independent. Now, you mentioned Seema Misra's trial there. She was, of course, a postmistress in Surrey. In 2010, she was accused of stealing £75,000. She was tried, convicted, sentenced to 15 months in prison. She served 4 and was pregnant at the time. Now, evidence in her trial was given by a man named Gareth Jenkins, an engineer at Fujitsu. Basically, he was the architect of the Horizon IT system. He was put forward as an expert witness, essentially to explain how it all worked. But yeah, we've looked at these documents submitted to the inquiry, and they raise questions about how he carried out that role. Now, firstly, he sent his draft statement to a man named Warwick Tatford. Now, he was the prosecutor working for the post office. At one point, Gareth Jenkins said he could not 100% rule out problems with Horizon screens as a possible cause for some of these cash shortfalls. Mr. Tatford wrote back, "Please rephrase. This will be taken as a damaging concession." In the final testimony, Mr. Jenkins said no scenario had been presented that could explain the losses because of poorly calibrated screens. Another exchange saw Mr. Jenkins say he agreed with a defence expert that some postmaster training issues could account for some shortfalls. He said, "I support his findings regarding discrepancies in cash in almost every period." Mr. Tatford responded, saying that agreement might be interpreted as a concession that the post office case is entirely flawed. In the final statement, Mr. Jenkins instead said cash discrepancies indicated at least poor management within the branch, probably something more serious.
And what's the response been, Mark, and what could the implications of all this be?
Yeah, well, look, by law, this draft document should have been shared with Seema Misra's defence team in what's called disclosure. They were not. All they saw was the final statement after those changes had been made. Seema Misra told us she found it horrible to see this for the first time, and what appeared she thought to see words being put into the mouth of an expert witness. Her former solicitor said she didn't believe her client had received a fair trial. Warwick Tatford said he'd offered an apology to Seema Misra. He's accepted he's overstepped the mark. Didn't want to comment further. Gareth Jenkins has yet to give evidence, so didn't want to comment. The post office said it was focusing on righting the wrongs of the past. But just briefly, this expert testimony was used in other cases. We know the police is investigating 2 people. One expert told us these documents could see that net widened.
Mark, thank you very much indeed.
Let's take another quick look at the papers. And the front page of The Guardian has an incredibly moving story of Alan Mara, a woman who until recently was, as the paper puts it, living the high life, going to great restaurants, seeing all her old friends, enjoying fancy drinks. And the reason she was doing that was because on Monday she ended up at Dignitas, this is the Dining Centre Lake Zurich, and she there took her own life at 10 a.m. yesterday. She says to the paper, "I just feel ready. The things that makes me break down is talking about my friends and having to say goodbye to people." She said she wanted to speak because we need to talk about assisted dying. need to talk about choice. I'm not scared to die, she says. I'm scared of dying in pain. Something we've covered at some length, of course, on this programme. Very quick story in the FT as well, worth noting, about rents shooting up. Average rent rises of 9% this year off the back of higher regulation and, of course, higher mortgage costs as well.
Well, you say that, but plenty of good news as well on the paper's economic.
Thank you.
In case we get told we're talking down, bringing in the Daily Mail, mortgage holders economy turns a corner at last. Inflation falls to a 2-year low. 5 rate cuts possible in 2024. The Eyes front page. UK on track for summer interest rate cuts after inflation falls. So the paper's getting behind Rishi Sunak's vision for a more positive outlook for the economy. And an interesting column in The Guardian from Owen Jones, columnist who is leaving the Labour Party. He says he's joining a movement which is called We Deserve Better. He says those seeking transformative policies are now fragmented, but they don't have to be. And the premise of this new initiative is simple. If the left doesn't band together, only pressure on Labour will come from the migrant bashing, rich worshipping right. That whole idea of the fragmentation of political parties and the left is what we've talked about with Alistair Campbell on this week's Today podcast, which is available now.
It is 16 minutes to 7.
Now, Rishi Sunak was keen to talk about better economic figures at Prime Minister's Question Time yesterday, but the Labour leader had other ideas, as our parliamentary correspondent Susie Hume now reports.
Despite Westminster talk of leadership plots and putschis, Rishi Sunak can still get a loyal member of the cast, Giles Watling, to cue him his line at Question Time. It was about helping with the cost of living.
Does he agree with me that cutting inflation is the very best way to do that?
Well, the Prime Minister could agree with that.
Today's figures show that our plan is working. Inflation has fallen to 3.4% from its peak over 11%.
He needed to get that in right at the start because, sure enough, the Labour leader certainly had no plans to accentuate the positive.
Violent prisoners released early because the Tories wrecked the criminal justice system. 3,500 small boat arrivals already this year because the Tories lost control of the border.
Keir Starmer's list of bad stuff went on for some time.
Because the Tories broke it. Millions paying more on their mortgages.
It went on and on.
Pensioners, a £46 billion hole.
Finally, he got to his punchline.
Why is the Prime Minister so scared to call an election?
The Prime Minister said he'd addressed the question of an election date weeks ago.
My working assumption is that the election will be in the second half of the year. But I must say, I thought that out of everybody, he'd actually be the most grateful, Mr. Speaker, because he's now actually got time to come up with a plan for Britain. We're all looking forward to finally seeing it.
We're ready. Just call it.
Sitting 2 seats down from Rishi Sunak was the Commons leader Penny Mordaunt, rather